In this case, the speakers have asked for a 3-minute opening statement. So Joe, you're going to get us started with the first opening, please.
Thank you, Linda. I appreciate that. Thank you all for being here this evening.
With the red button.
Is it on now? Nope.
Well, that's the same one we had trouble with before.
Lights on. Hello?
I think it's,
Anyone out there?
yeah, that sounds better.
Is that better? I'll just lean forward. How's that?
There you go.
Okay. Thank you again for coming out here now that you can hear me. I'm here on behalf of the Yes, Keep Our Groceries Tax-Free Measure 103. We brought the measure to the public really out of frustration over the last 8 to 10 years of tax policy. That's why we're here tonight. And we brought it to the ballot box for that very reason, to try to push forward the tax reform debate in Salem and around the state, and to make sure that people's groceries in this debate are held tax-free. It's often said that everything's a good tax as long as it's taxed on someone else. I want to tax someone with income, maybe I don't have income. I want to tax somebody with property because I may not have property. This is a tax we could all agree on that at the very basic core, it is very narrowly written. There's a lot of commas in there because of all the challenges that we've had in the legislature and other areas in trying to get tax reform. But it's very narrow. It exempts any raw or processed food for human consumption from taxes on the sales of those products from farm to fork. That's what the measure does. It does not include marijuana, it does not include alcohol, and it does not include tobacco. Those are all excluded. They have their own tax bases, and whether or not you want to argue whether they're basic needs or not, I'll leave that to you. But that is clearly what the measure does, and I'm looking forward to answering your questions on the measure, why we took this approach, and why we brought it before you, the voters.
Juan Carlos?
Thank you all for being here this evening. When assessing Measure 103, you would do well to follow the advice given during the Watergate investigation. Follow the money. Nearly all of the millions of dollars being spent by the supporters of Measure 103, it's coming from just 3 of the nation's biggest corporations, Costco, Albertsons, and Kroger's. And these big corporations aren't spending their big bucks because they care about your pocketbooks. It's because they care about their profits. Measure 103 is about preemptively shielding the grocery industry and its biggest corporations from any new taxes they can well afford to pay. Revenue that we could be using here in Oregon to better fund our schools, address healthcare coverage, and address the housing crisis. Worse still, the measure would lock in this preferential tax treatment for the grocery industry in our Constitution. Now, the proponents claim that this is an effort to protect consumers from taxes on their groceries, but no one is proposing to tax food. The Oregon Center for Public Policy has been fighting against regressive tax proposals for over 20 years. If someone were trying to tax food, we would be out there in the front lines fighting against it. But there is no such effort. Now, there are a number of specific problems with Measure 103, but I'm going to highlight 3 of them. First, the measure is risky and flawed. So, for example, the language of the measure is broad enough to give a tax exemption to companies that transfer and distribute food. In other words, the trucking companies. Second, the measure takes away local control. The measure applies not just to the state government, but to local governments. Some local governments have considered enacting a tax on sugary beverages to fight the obesity epidemic. A reasonable option. 2 Oregon communities, Yachats and Ashland, have chosen to enact a tax on restaurant meals in order to fund important public services. Measure 103 would prevent any other cities in our state from doing the same, despite what their residents may think is reasonable. Third, Measure 103 will make it harder to fix Oregon's corporate income tax system. Oregon's corporate income tax system has been shrinking over the years. And in order for us to better fund education and other essential services, we need to make corporations pay their fair share. It's that simple. But under the measure, at least 3 of the nation's biggest corporations, Fortune 500 companies, will be exempt from any changes to Oregon's corporate minimum tax. And it is a bare minimum tax. Again, remember that Measure 103 is a constitutional amendment, so all of these problematic features will be effectively locked in. In conclusion, Measure 103 is an unnecessary, risky measure whose real purpose is to shield three big corporations from any further responsibility for the common good. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
And this is also a complicated measure. I'm going to take a point of personal privilege here. May I ask each of you, before we get to the closing statements, to maybe expand your potential closing statements? But we've thrown out a lot of issues here in terms of the corporate tax, the Constitution, et cetera. How about a minute to tell the audience about some stuff that we haven't kind of massaged enough? Anything you want to go into more depth on in terms of what we've talked about so far? You got to think fast. Sorry, Joe.
Well, thank you, Linda. I heard a lot of suppositions by my opponent here on the left. Brought up the bottle bill, brought up fuel taxes, brought up the hospitals, brought up, it's all camouflage. There's simply one difference between where I sit and where Juan sits. Those who want to tax groceries and want to keep that alive and keep filing measures at the ballot box and keep filing more initiatives, which they have over and over 6 times in the last 4 years to tax groceries. And those who want to say, hands off people's groceries, hands off their food, you're going to make prices go up, you're going to hurt people on fixed income, you're going to hurt people who are trying to put food on the table. Let's talk about all the other issues in tax reform.
Juan Carlos?
Just for the record, visit our website and you'll see what we stand for. We are very clear on being against regressive taxes and have been for 20 years. But the issue that I want to highlight is this. Here in Oregon, we're facing a lot of needs. Our schools are chronically underfunded. We have a severe statewide housing crisis, and our lawmakers have done very little to invest in them. We need to find revenue to address these problems that are affecting Oregonians. And this measure is basically a roadblock. It's a power play by 3 big corporations to shield themselves from any further responsibility. That's the goal, and made worse by the fact that it is a constitutional amendment. Joe says that, oh, well, the Oregon Constitution contains all kinds of junk. But once you put it in there, it's really hard to get it out of there. So, and worse when it's a loosely drafted one that will create all kinds of unintended consequences.
All right, I threw you guys a curveball there, but technically you still have a closing statement. Juan Carlos, you want to take it?
Sure. Well, thank you all for being here this evening, and thank you, Joe, very much for participating. With Measure 103, 3 of the nation's very biggest corporations are making a power play. They're trying to get not just a special tax advantage, but a constitutionally protected tax advantage. This would come at a time when Oregon is trying to figure out a way forward to better fund our schools and our statewide housing crisis. Measure 103 would create an obstacle towards resolving these problems. A no on Measure 103 is a no to a corporate power grab. A no on Measure 103 is a no to 3 big corporations changing Oregon's constitution to their advantage. A no on Measure 103 is a no to special interests coming into our state and taking away local control over community finances and community health issues. This November, you can protect Oregonians by voting no on Measure 103. Thank you.
And Joe.
Our campaign, yes, keep your groceries tax-free, is really quite self-explanatory right in the title. This is about keeping people's basic needs, basic food, anything that you eat or drink, tax-free and out of this discussion. We have lots of issues in Oregon. We have lots of issues locally. But taxing your groceries and having an aggressive tax on food, we've never had one in Oregon. But the assault is on. It has been going on for the last 8 years. Over 33 times they've been at the ballot box trying to go through tax policy. The last 6 have included sales taxes on groceries from farm to fork, just so you wouldn't see it. So we're not here because we don't have anything better to do or where it's a greedy grab. We're here because it's bad tax policy and we don't think that we should be making food more expensive in this climate. And we got to get people at the table. That includes the governor, that includes the legislature, on real tax reform, but not at the expense of people's dinner tables or putting food on their table for their kids to go to school. It's just the wrong thing to do. Vote yes on Measure 103. We thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, and thank you for your flexibility. Thanks also to Metro East Community Media for recording, for all of you in the audience, for the volunteers collecting the questions and timing. Please check our website, lwvpdx.org, to view all our forums and for TV replay information. For more election information, pick up, our nonpartisan voters guide, which is also at the back of the room for you here, but for those of you watching on TV at your local public library, New Seasons Market, or Meals on Wheels Dining Center. For the similar information, go to vote411.org. Election Day is November 6th. As in all Oregon elections, you will receive a mail-in ballot. If you do not, check with your County Board of Elections to make sure that your registration is accurate. Ballots must be mailed early or delivered to an official drop-off site anywhere in Oregon no later than 8 p.m. on Tuesday, November 6th. The postmark itself does not count. Thank you for watching. Be informed, as you are, by doing all this work. And you can see how complex this issue is from the information that the gentleman has given us. Remember, your vote is very important. Help your friends, neighbors, and family vote. And we'll now take a short break after we thank our panelists.